Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avirgan. This day, June 1st, 1863, is the eve of an attack led by none other than Harriet Tubman. The next day, June 2nd, Tubman would lead 150 black Union soldiers who were part of the U.S. 2nd South Carolina Volunteers. She would lead them in a raid that would become known as the Combahee River Raid, which liberated more than 700 enslaved people. Tubman became the first woman to lead an attack in the Civil War. She had, of course, been working to free enslaved people and shuttle them to safety, often via the Underground Railroad, for decades by this point. So here to discuss the Combahee River Raid are, as always, Nicole Hammer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello there.
Hello, Jody.
Hey there.
So Kellie, I was wondering if we could start a little bit big picture on the myth of Harriet Tubman, and let's see if you'll go there with me on this. But we've talked a bit on this show about how MLK has been flattened by history and kind of de-radicalized in a way, and people just kind of forget the different phases in the evolution of his work. And I wonder if there's a similar thing that has happened to Harriet Tubman, of maybe some people thinking of her as a kind of guardian angel protector type who shuttled people to freedom. But then some people also have this notion of her as a super spy or something. So
she also sort of gets the sweet old grandma kind of thing, there's so much.
So where
to
does
her.
this fit in? Yeah.
So much. I mean, this is probably about the midpoint in her life. She's about 41 years old when this takes place. A lot of people don't know that Harriet Tubman lived to be 91. She lived to the 20th century. She dies in 1913.
Yep.
So she has a long, full life. But this moment, I think, is probably one of the most heralded moments, aside from her, escapes back and forth to the South, catching or helping fugitive slaves to escape. This becomes the thing that she's most known for, her work in the Civil War, the fact that she's in South Carolina, that she's leading these raids, that she's the only woman in American history to lead a group of men in battle. I mean, it's incredible what Harriet Tubman is doing, and she's so fearless, and not just fearless, but I want to say she's brilliant. And I think it's so important to highlight that, because it takes an incredible amount of skill and savviness to be able to know how to navigate these places you've never been before. And I think we always attach the moniker of Harriet as brave, but I want to say, no, Harriet is brilliant. And we see her brilliance and genius all in this moment.
And I just want to flag again the fact that she's 41 at this point.
Yeah.
I mean, having accomplished so much already, but nighttime raids are a young person's game. And by the time you're 41, she's still out, and it's remarkable.
It is.
Yeah. So Niki, what do we need to know about this raid itself? Let's paint the picture.
Sure. So maybe we could take one step back and talk about why she's doing the raid. The Emancipation Proclamation had been issued in 1862. It goes into effect in January of 1863. And it says, if you are still involved in this insurrection against the United States, then the people who you've enslaved are free. And that's all well and good, but who's gonna make them give up the enslaved people? Enslavers do not just wake up and say, oh, well, Lincoln said we had to stop enslaving people. So somebody has to enforce it. And a lot of what you see are enslaved people who run toward the Union lines when they receive news of the Emancipation Proclamation. But a lot of other people are just stuck, or they haven't heard the news, or they're not in shape to cross like hundreds and hundreds of miles to get to the nearest line. And so this raid is a way of going to the enslaved and sort of jailbreaking them out of slavery, which makes it extra cool, I think.
I want us to think of June 1st. There are 3 federal gunboats that set sail from Beaufort, South Carolina, that are traveling up the Combahee River. And Harriet Tubman is with 2 other gunboats, and she is pretty much leading this assault to get as many enslaved people as possible to Union lines. And the way that she does this is incredible, because enslaved people are very hesitant about, should I trust this? Should I not trust this? But Harriet Tubman is someone who's able to galvanize like all of these people, to wave them on, to get them on as many ships and boats as possible. And when she sees how, terrified, how nervous they are, because Confederates are also shooting at them and trying to prevent them from leaving. People are dodging bullets. I mean, it's chaotic. And in the midst of this, Harriet does something incredible. She starts to sing. She can't speak the Gullah dialect. Many of the enslaved African Americans at that time spoke Gullah or Geechee. And she starts to sing to them to calm them down and to reassure them. And she sings about how Uncle Sam is rich enough to buy you all a farm. And I think of that moment and how like incredible it must have been to finally see freedom for the first time and be shepherded by the one and only Harriet Tubman, and get to freedom eventually.
Yeah. There's this other sort of interesting myth then around this raid that kind of comes in. So, we talked about maybe if you know like one thing about Harriet Tubman, you have this maybe matronly opinion of her. And then if you know a second thing, you maybe swing all the way in the other direction, as we were saying, of like super spy or whatever. But actually, that's more complicated, I think, than people realize too, because as you were saying, she was out of her element here. So it's not like she took all the Union soldiers and said, I know this, and here's how the raid's going to go, and we're going to like SEAL Team 6 it and do this thing and this thing and this thing. And I know she was navigating a space and an environment that she didn't really know. She wasn't like using superpowers here. And so, as you said, she didn't speak the language. She didn't know this part of South Carolina. She was figuring out, which I think shows not just her ruthless skills, but also her improvisational ability as well. But it sort of complicates this other myth that I think has emerged of her.
But I think that improvisational capacity, which she most likely really honed as part of the Underground Railroad, is so important here, because one of the boats runs aground on the way there, so they've lost some of their capacity. As Kellie was saying, she thinks on the spur of the moment to sing this abolitionist song, which is a way of signaling through music that she's one of them, right? So it wasn't just that she was singing, but the particular song that she was singing. And that's what I think shows us exactly what Kellie was saying, that she wasn't just brave, but she was brilliant, because it's one thing to be able to go out and gather this information, but to go in a little bit blind and figure it out as you go along shows, and reassure
others in the process.
Well, that's to sort of flip the perspective a bit and think about the people who were being told, oh, you're free now, get on this boat. I mean, and how scary that moment would be. To see a white Union soldier is very different from seeing someone like Harriet Tubman. And it does seem like the Union understood that Tubman had this role as a trusted figure, and at some level just a black face, who people would trust. And so they kind of deployed her in that way, knowing that she would have this ability to gain trust. Kellie, what is like the nuts and bolts of, I think we talked about this a little bit with the John Brown raid, but what are the nuts and bolts of like getting people out of this? Very few people die. And it's actually sort of surprising. There's very little Confederate resistance in this moment. 700 people. Where do they go? What do they do?
So, it's not just, when we think of 700 people, it's men, women, children. So getting all of them onto these boats is a really big task. But also, she does have the help of other Black soldiers who say, okay, where do you need us? How do you want us? And they're helping to get as many people on the boats as possible. And then a lot of them are like, hey, we're part of this effort. And they seek revenge on their former masters. They know the area as well, and they help her in this effort. So it seems very singular, but really it requires the collective of everyone being on the same page about this is how we're going to do this. This is how we're going to do this as quickly as possible. And everyone using their skill to really undermine the Confederates, outgun them, outsmart them. And it's also interesting to me that while the Confederates are shooting, that not a lot of people died. There's a report of one girl who was shot and killed as she was running away, which is tragic in and of itself. But if you consider the amount of people that were leaving, the fact that only one person dies is also extraordinary.
Yeah, when you think about how many people were killed fleeing slavery in the years before, that this was so successful is mind-boggling. And at the same time, it's like, and there was only one.
Yeah.
Right. This wasn't something that she would continue to do throughout the war. It was a mission that was empowered by the U.S. military. They gave her orders to give her passage there. They obviously gave her supplies. But only about 100 or so of the 700 people ended up joining the U.S. military to fight. And so I think that it was considered by the U.S. military as a bit of a failure, perhaps having a different objective in mind than she did.
Yeah, it's worth pointing out this is sort of thought of as a recruitment effort in some sense, getting people for the fight, because the war was not going well for the Union at this particular juncture. As we start to wrap up, Kellie, you have a lot of your work is focused on raids and revolts and slave revolts, and we think of those as maybe happening in the period just before the war. And I'm curious kind of how you would compare slave revolts in that era versus continuing into the war itself, and how much we should think of those as part of the dynamic during the actual Civil War.
I mean, there's a lot of scholars now that look at the Civil War as a war of abolition. This was like a Black man's fight to liberate himself and other enslaved people, and the fact that 250,000 Black soldiers fight in the Civil War. This is sort of like the official rebellion. I think if you think of things that took place like in the 40s and 50s, we see those as slave rebellions or as John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry, but they're almost always failures or rumors that get revealed. But I think the Civil War is the first time where Black people can pick up arms, turn it against their slave holders, and be well within the right and be supported by the Union. So it's a terrifying time for the Confederacy for sure, but it also marks a turning point in the Civil War, in a war that the Union was losing until Lincoln not only signs the Emancipation Proclamation, but also allows Black soldiers to fight. That pivot really shifts the rest of the war for Union victory.
Any final thoughts from either of you on coming back to Harriet Tubman as a sort of historical figure? Do you see a flattening of her? If she shows up on the $20 bill, literally flattening of Harriet Tubman. But is there part of her story that you feel like we need to remind ourselves of and reclaim? And how do you see her story kind of shifting and changing, especially given, as we said, a life lived to 90? Most people do 3 things in their life. She did about 15 things. There's an incredible accumulation of different eras and phases, parts of her life. Which parts do you feel like we need to just keep beating the drum about?
I mean, I would say her efforts to get so many of her people out of slavery, and the fact that she never gets captured, to me, is just still astonishing. But also the fact that she's pushing for women's rights. I mean, she's a huge suffragist. A lot of people don't know that about her. She tries to start like a senior citizen home. She's very adamant about taking care of her parents. She's very spiritual. A lot of people, I think, try to attribute, sort of either like Black girl magic or like, this sort of superhuman strength to her. But she was incredibly spiritual and faithfully prayed, spoke to God, heard from God, and was not, made no sort of quarrels about that. She was like, yeah, God said, no, But she heeded that. And so to me, she's just a very complicated, brilliant woman. And I think we should know more about all of the aspects of her life. It's still kind of shocking to me that there's only really like 1 or 2 films about her. Right. She seems like she has a kind of story that would lead to 10 different films if necessary.
There was a movie called Tubman or Harriet. There's a movie called Harriet. Yeah. I suppose that I haven't seen it, but the new Amazon series based on Colson Whitehead's book Underground Railroad swirls in this. I don't think Harriet Tubman's a character in there, but it swirls in this world as well. But yes,
Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, the Water Dancer. She's in the Water Dancer. She has like a formidable role in the Water Dancer. Yeah. So maybe we'll see more aspects of her. I hope.
And I would just add that, stories like this, which are well known, really benefit from revisiting through a lens that isn't that Black girl magic lens, right? Yeah. That you don't lose something when you complexify or you deepen the story about her. What you learn when you find out that she wasn't actually the super spy scouting through South Carolina is you learn something else about her abilities, that she had this kind of flexibility and improvisation. And I think that understanding more what she really did doesn't diminish her accomplishments. I think it can really amplify them. So there shouldn't be a fear of digging in and trying to figure out all of the different moving parts of her life. Oh,
and I almost forgot. She has a disability. Like, she could just pass out on the drop of a dime. Like, that in and of itself, the fact that she has a traumatic brain injury and is doing all of this while having that disability, again, boss, nobody compares. Nobody compares to Tubman.
All right, well, we will leave it on that note. Nicole Hammer, thanks to you as always.
Thanks, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
And before we get to the credits, I do want to say, listeners, you probably have heard that we are in the middle of the Radiotopia Fund Drive. This is a chance to raise money to help support both this show and the shows in general. So, maybe a chance to just say we are extremely proud of being part of this network. Sometimes I have to pinch myself. I look at all the other shows that this place does. It's really remarkable. And we love our listeners, and we love our listeners who turn into supporters.
Yeah, can I just say, as a new co-host, this has been so much fun for me. Every single time we record, I look forward to it. It's been so wonderful, and to hear from the listeners who just get so much out of every single episode that we put out there. It's been an affirming experience, to say the least. And I want to keep doing this.
Yeah, we have so much generous feedback from people who listen, which is amazing. And if you do want to undergo that transformation from listener to supporter, now is the time.
Yeah, there you go. Good. So I won't belabor the point too much with the fundraising stuff. You've heard the spots. I will say in the coming weeks we're going to maybe do some fun incentives or whatever and talk a little bit about it. But anyway, mostly thank you everyone who listens to the show and supports the show. We could not do it without you. This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or ideas for the show. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia.